Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane is no stranger to dominating news headlines, and this week wasn't any different. On Tuesday, a full bench of High Court judges handed her a devastating loss. The court found Mkhwebane's CR17 Bosasa report to be fatally flawed and unlawful.
We have found that her investigation into the CR17 campaign donations fell outside her field of competence. Further, that her report and the findings and remedial action contained in it were invalid on several grounds. The Public Protector's decision to investigate and report on the CR17 election campaign for the African National Congress leadership, elected in December 2017, is reviewed, declared invalid and set aside.
And that's where we find ourselves this week on This Story, at the center of Busisiwe Mkhwebane's tug of war with President Cyril Ramaphosa. I'm Rian Grobler, News 24 senior desk reporter, and I'll be anchoring this season of the show.
You're listening to The Story. It's a new podcast from News 24. We'll speak to journalists and experts about the week's biggest story. This is what we saw, heard, and uncovered this week.
To unpack all of this, I have in studio with me News 24's investigative reporter, Kyle Cowan. How's it, Kyle?
Hey, Rian, nice to be here.
So, you had a bit of an eventful day on Tuesday.
Yes, I moseyed on down to Pretoria quite early in the morning to make sure I get parking outside the Gauteng High Court. Struggled to get in up through the lift, got to courtroom 4E, and got settled in front row seat to sit and hear the judgment in President Cyril Ramaphosa's review of Advocate Mkhwebane's report into this whole CR17 mess. And chatting away merrily with some journalism colleagues, and suddenly we realized that we were in the wrong courtroom. So I ended up sprinting up two flights of stairs, burst into the courtroom as Judge Keatley was just busy introducing the judgment, and kind of gave me a look and carried on reading, and I quickly settled down to get down to the business of the day.
So what was the essence of the case? Let's start there.
It starts in November 2018 when President Ramaphosa stands up in Parliament and he's responding to oral questions, and the then leader of the DA asks him this question about this now well-traversed 500,000 rand payment that was ostensibly for his son Andile. And the president responds and says this payment is in respect of a contract that my son has with this corruption-accused company, Bosasa. And a week or so later, he then sends a letter to the Speaker of Parliament and says, well, no, hang on, it wasn't actually for my son. It turns out my people have just told me that this 500,000 rand was paid into a bank account used by the CR17 campaign. And now this then leads Maimane to file a complaint with the Public Protector. And that complaint talks about suspicions of money laundering surrounding this. Did the president lie to Parliament when he responded? And I think Mr. Maimane wanted the Public Protector to delve into that. And then, of course, she brings out this report that says the president lied to Parliament. There are suspicions of money laundering on his part and the part of the campaign, ostensibly, and that he violated the Executive Ethics Act in failing to declare donations to the campaign because they were essentially of personal benefit to him.
Okay, so what happened on Tuesday? What was the judgment?
So on Tuesday, we went to court to listen to a full bench of the High Court deliver a judgment on this very contentious issue, because Ramaphosa immediately filed a review application to try and set aside this report, because it's obviously very serious. He's the head of state. There's talk about money laundering. There's a lot of political noise surrounding this as well. So the court essentially eviscerates the Public Protector. They pull apart every single one of her findings, every single remedial action. The phrases used were unfathomable, reckless, irrational, unlawful. It is by far, in my experience, one of the most scathing judgments against an incumbent of an office like the Public Protector. It's something that the president's lawyer himself said, if it wasn't so tragic, it would be a joke.
That sounds pretty serious. So what were some of the standouts for you in this judgment?
So, Rian, there are two quotes that really stood out to me, and I'd like to read them to you. So one of the findings that the Public Protector made was that there was the suspicion of money laundering. relating to the CR17 campaign, and this is what the court found. Clearly, the public protector had no foundation in fact and in law to arrive at her finding that the president had involved himself in illegal activities sufficient to evoke a suspicion of money laundering. In addition, the public protector based her finding on legislation that has nothing to do with the offence of money laundering. The conclusion is inescapable, that in dealing with this issue, the public protector completely failed to properly analyse and understand the facts and evidence at her disposal. She also showed a complete lack of basic knowledge of the law and its application. And the public protector here is basically told that what you did was an egregious error. It was bad from the beginning to end. And she quoted the wrong act, the wrong law in reaching this finding. So if you start with the wrong law, how can you ever find that someone did something wrong? So the second one, which I think is even more key, and this relates to one of the complaints. There were two complaints, originally one by Mr. Maimane and then another one by the EFF's Floyd Shivambu. And Mr. Shivambu asked for the public protector to also look into whether or not Andile Ramaphosa actually had a contract with Bosasa, as his father had stated. And this is what the court finds. The public protector did not make the obvious finding that the president had told the truth about his son having an agreement with African Global Operations, or Bosasa. In our view, in failing to do so, the public protector did not act with an open mind, and so breached one of the cardinal requirements of the position. That's, again, as serious as it gets. One of the key things about the Office of the Public Protector is that, and any investigation really, is that you can never assume innocence or guilt from the outset. You have to keep an open mind, and the courts have ruled on this previously, particularly with public protector matters, that the public protector has to keep an open mind. She has to walk into an investigation expecting anything. She cannot put her blinkers on and go down one road and ignore everything else. And the fact that the president stood up in Parliament and said, yes, this payment was in respect of this contract that my son has, and then there's a complaint relating to that contract, she finds the president guilty of a plethora of things, very serious things. And we, as News 24, have reported on the existence of this contract. We know it exists. We've seen it. We've written about it. We've written about the amount of money Andile got. And the public protector completely ignores that.
And that pretty much says it all, doesn't it?
It is the third time now in cases of immense national interest. The president now with CR17, previously it was the South African Reserve Bank matter, and the Estina case involving the Gupta family and politicians from the Free State. And in each case, she failed to deliver the goods. She did not step up to the plate.
What's going to happen next?
No matter what the court says of her or finds of her conduct, or even lashes her with personal costs orders, she doesn't care. She's going to continue doing what she does, and unfortunately we're going to sit as the public of this country and pick up the pieces every time.
So joining us in the studio now is News 24 senior politics reporter Tshidi Madia. So Tshidi, we can't talk about Busisiwe Mkhwebane without considering the impact of her office on the political landscape.
Oh, absolutely not. From her very appointment, when you think about this particular public protector, or even the ones previously, I'm thinking about Advocate Tshidi Madia, that office is highly political, with politicians not wanting to be investigated by the office. So no matter what it does, it's damned if it does, it's damned if it doesn't, you know. So obviously this issue is political. It spills over into political factions. It's used as a tool for expediency in the political world. So we're not surprised seeing the different factions and the different parties, some in support of Busisiwe Mkhwebane and some saying, thank goodness, you know, the court has had these outcomes. But I must also say that there's someone looking at the president saying, but there's still questions that President Cyril Ramaphosa needs to answer, and will continue using this against him, the CR17 campaign, against him in attempts to weaken him and his political hold on the ANC.
All right, so let's talk about the reactions. They haven't really been surprising, have they?
No, none really have been surprising. You've got the ANC bigwigs and the pro-Cyril Ramaphosa people who are saying, thank goodness, it's time that she falls on her own sword. You also have people like the EFF who've branded the judgment from the High Court as ridiculous. You've got people from the African Transformation Movement, its leader Vuyo Zungula, saying that the court utters bias and that the president is suddenly absolved from his own responsibility of having so much money directed towards his campaign within the ANC, and saying that the courts are inconsistent, that when Julius Malema was part of the ANC Youth League and not an official in any capacity as far as public representatives were concerned, he was investigated and was found guilty by then Public Protector Tshidi Madia. But of course, the argument around that is that the investigation was into his links to the Limpopo province, or whether or not they siphoned money from Limpopo, and they were found guilty. So it's also a little bit tricky in terms of how this is being used as a political football, as I said to you.
But then, Tshidi, on the other hand, we also have the RET group.
Absolutely, the so-called radical economic transformation supporters and fighters, those who are championing, for absolute economic transformation, are some of the biggest supporters. You got faces like Andile Mkutama there, the son of former President Jacob Zuma. Edward Zuma is there. You've got people from the African Transformation Movement. You have Andile Lungisa, a series of people who are seen as rogue characters, really, if you may. Carl Niehaus from the ANC, seen as rogue characters, all coming up. I mean, part of this is that they're using it to further their own political interests and their own issues, particularly within the ANC, when you look at people like Carl Niehaus and Andile Lungisa. And so they've come out quite loudly and boldly saying that they stand with the public protector, again accusing the judiciary of being biased and saying that it's been captured by white monopoly capital, that they wouldn't be surprised if in some of the documents, there are some documents that have not been, that remain classified, that the courts are refusing to show all the bank statements. So we don't know who all the people involved in the CR17 campaign are. And so a lot of these RET people saying that, you might find that there are judges' names, and that's why they're trying to work so hard to make sure that information remains concealed. But of course, this is for political expediency, as I pointed out earlier.
So what do you think this means for Mkhwebane going forward?
So she will fight. I don't expect her to not fight. It's in her nature, from what we've seen since she's occupied office, to fight. She says that, she's not been the popular choice, that she came in under fire with claims that she was a spy. So I think she will fight. It's in her nature.
So it doesn't sound like Busisiwe Mkhwebane will be backing down anytime soon. That was Tshidi Madia, News 24 senior political reporter. The Story is a weekly podcast by News 24. It is hosted by me, Rian Groble, and produced by Nokotula Manyati.